In this lecture, we're going to make a start on building out some more features within our app using Claude Code to generate those features. Now, the first thing we're going to do is implement a basic dashboard section where the user can select a particular date and display all the workouts logged for that date. So of course, we're looking now at the completed project or an example of what the completed project could look like. And I've already gone ahead and created some dummy data for this particular project. And we're going to try and emulate then this particular dashboard. So let's go ahead and do this then. Let's first of all get Claude Code to generate a basic dashboard for us where we have a date picker. And whenever the date is changed within the date picker, we'll also ask Claude Code to load any workouts that were logged for that particular date. So let's head on back then to VS Code. And the first thing we want to do is upload our code to a new GitHub repo, because it makes sense that we create a new branch to implement this new feature, because of course, the dashboard page is a new feature for us in this particular project. So let's head on over then to the source control tab and let's scroll to the top here. And I'm just going to add a commit message in here, just saying project setup, because all we've done so far is set up our project. So let's hit commit here. Then let's hit publish branch. And I'm going to publish this to a public repository, so you guys can actually see all of the code that I generated throughout this course. So I'm going to select public repository here. And perfect. It looks like we have our new repo all set up. Now from here, we just need to branch off of the main branch. So let's go to the more options here and let's go to branch. Then we want to create a branch from the main branch, which we're currently in. So let's select create branch, and the branch name, I'm just going to call it something like dashboard page. So let's hit enter on this. Then let's hit publish branch. And now we're in a good position to actually get Claude Code to build out our dashboard page. So through this then, I'm going to use my existing Claude Code instance, but I'm going to clear the chat from the previous lectures. So let's use the /clear command here to clear the conversation. So we're starting off with a blank slate. Now from here, we're going to ask Claude Code to implement the dashboard page. So let's say then, implement a /dashboard page, which will contain a date picker that defaults to the current date. Then let's say this page will load all the logged workouts for the date displayed in the date picker. So let's leave it at that for now. And let's see what Claude Code generates for us. Now, a quick heads up, it's highly unlikely we're going to use the code that Claude Code generates off the back of this prompt. Now, the reason for this is because we haven't guided Claude Code yet on how to generate code specific for this particular code base. Remember, ideally, we want to exclusively use Shadcn UI for our UI and our components. However, we haven't really directed Claude Code yet to use Shadcn UI. So just a quick heads up, we're probably not going to use the code generated off the back of this prompt. However, I want to show you how we can heavily influence Claude Code to generate code that's more appropriate for our particular project and our particular code base. With that said, let's hit enter on this prompt and see what Claude Code comes back with. So we can see Claude Code is first of all trying to understand our code base. Once it's done that, then it can go ahead and implement the feature that we asked it to. So we can see Claude Code wants to create a new page.tsx file located in the dashboard directory. So this will actually create a new root within Next.js. So the /dashboard page then will be available within our project. So yes, we want to allow all edits during this session. So I'm going to select this second option here. Now we can see that Claude Code is trying to create an API endpoint to fetch workouts for a specific date. Now, I really dislike this approach because we're using the latest version of Next.js in this project. We don't need to use an API route to retrieve our data. ideally this data will be loaded via a server component. So already, without seeing any UI, I already do not like the output from Claude Code. So this is what I mean by if we don't influence the output of Claude Code is very rarely actually going to generate code appropriate for our project. However, with that said, it looks like Claude Code has finished generating. So I'm going to select this second option again to always allow the npm run lint command to be run. So I'm going to hit the second option here, and we can see there was no issues found off the back of running the linter, and we get a nice summary of the changes that Claude Code made. However, like I said, I'm really not a big fan of the back-end implementation that Claude Code has generated, but I haven't yet seen the UI. So let's take a look at the UI then. Let's create a new terminal window here. Let's run npm run dev to fire up our dev server. Then let's head on over to localhost in the browser. Then let's head on over to the /dashboard page. And it looks like we're actually getting an error within Next.js here. However, while the UI doesn't look too bad, I can already tell that the UI is not using Shadsin UI components. Now let's see what happens if we change the date. For example, let's navigate to a date that I know doesn't have any workouts logged, and perfect. We can see that our data fetching is actually working correctly, but this is not the way I would load data within a Next.js app. Now let's quickly take a look at the issue that we're experiencing in Next.js, and we can see that this is a hydration error, and it looks like there's just a mismatch between the rendered date because we're using this toLocale dateString function on our date. So that's not too big of an issue, that's easily fixable. However, like I mentioned, most of the code that Claude Code has generated for this dashboard page, I really don't like. So let's head on back then to VS Code. Let's take a look at the changes that Claude Code made. If we head on over to the source control tab, we can see a new root.ts file was added, which looks like a root handler for a GET request to retrieve all the workouts for a particular date for a particular user. Now, the really crazy thing with this is we're passing a user ID as a search param to this endpoint, which means we could potentially retrieve other users' data, and we have zero protection, and Claude Code is actually allowing this. So that's the crazy part here. This is actually incredibly insecure. So I think I've made my point clear now, in that if we don't guide Claude Code and influence the output of Claude Code, then Claude Code is really not going to produce the best results for our particular use case and for our particular project. So this is a really nice segue then into creating documentation files for Claude Code to follow to heavily influence the output of Claude Code. So in the next lecture then, I'm going to show you a technique that I really like to guide Claude Code in creating document files for Claude Code to follow. So we'll take a look at how we can heavily influence the output of Claude Code in the next lecture.